You were never meant to hear this. You were never meant to know the weight of the name Carroway or the blood it stains. Even now, as these words reach you, something old stirs, a thread, a pulse, a hand pressing against the veil of what should stay buried. Turn back now if you wish to remain unchanged. Walk away, and perhaps you'll still find comfort in the world they built for you. But if you stay, if you let me drag you down, you will see the cracks you were never meant to see. You will understand that some histories don't fade, they wait. Dogwood Parish was never a place to find on a map. The roads leading in were bones, thin and brittle, and the soil never remembered footprints. Travelers spoke of it in broken tones, half forgetting they'd passed through, as if the land itself gnawed at memory. But something had rooted itself there, something that was neither dead nor fully living. A house, tall and narrow, leaning forward as though it strained to hear the secrets whispered by the earth. They called it the Carroway House, but no one knew who named it, or when. It was as if the house had always been there, patient and watching. 3 sisters lived there. Not women, not in the way you'd think. They had names, but the names were soft things, fragile covers draped over what they truly were. Eunice, Mara, and Hester. Always seen in black. Always arriving unbidden, barefoot, their hands never clean. They were not invited, they simply came when the veil thinned. When a mother bled too long. When the crying stopped too soon. When something in the cradle was breathing that shouldn't be. And the townsfolk, desperate, trembling, let them come. Because whatever the sisters brought, it was better than what they would leave behind if refused. The Carroway sisters did not knock. They did not ask. They entered and they stayed until something was resolved. But resolution, you'll soon learn, does not mean peace. The first to record their presence was not a priest, nor a healer, but a gravedigger, a man who learned too late that some names, once written, cannot be erased. They called it the Carroway Curse. But a curse is just a word. What followed was something else entirely. You see, curses are not accidents. They do not simply fall from the mouths of the wicked or the superstitious. A true curse is crafted, stitched into the fabric of the living, bound by intention. The Carroway Curse was not some wandering malice. It was deliberate. It was fed. In the winter of 1841, something began to rot beneath the surface of Dogwood Parish, though no one dared to speak it aloud. Livestock delivered stillborns with hollow sockets. Milk curdled while still inside the cow. Children born that season arrived too silent, too alert, their eyes too knowing. The priest called for prayer. The doctor called it chance. But the gravedigger knew better. He had buried too many tiny boxes that winter. And he had begun to notice what others could not afford to see. Each grave bore the same symbol. A mark carved not by his hand, but by another, 3 concentric rings pierced by a single downward line. He had seen it before, years ago, scorched into the beams of a burned-out house on the edge of the woods. He remembered the smell of the place, the way the air trembled around it. The same air that now lingered around the Carroway house. The sisters would arrive before sunrise, before the first scream. No one summoned them. No one warned them. They simply knew. They carried no medicine. No blades. Only linen wraps, bone-handled shears, and jars of dark oil that steamed even in the cold. Those they touched survived, but they survived, changed. One boy, Thomas Greer, was born on a night when the sky refused to snow. He never cried. His mother swore his heartbeat pulsed in rhythm with the tapping of crows against her window. His father found the boy staring at the fireplace for hours, unmoving, his eyes reflecting not the flame, but something behind it. When the family sought the priest to bless the child, the priest recoiled. He claimed he saw something crawling beneath the infant's skin, something patient. Something waiting. The Carroway Curse did not kill swiftly. It was more precise than that. It planted itself in the quiet spaces. In the pauses between breaths. In the silence after prayers. And those marked by it, would never be fully alone again. The sisters had begun their work. The town had already begun to bleed. And what bled, would not stop. Dogwood Parish did not collapse all at once. Decay is not always a roar, it is often a slow, polite nod toward the inevitable. And the Carroway sisters thrived in that silence. Their power was not measured in thunder or flame. It moved through the soft places. Through the space between a heartbeat and a breath. Through the crack where grief seeps in unnoticed. Mothers whispered their names, but only in desperation, as if the mere act of speaking summoned them. The sisters arrived barefoot, their hair twisted in braids too tight, as though binding something in. They walked the frozen roads without leaving prints. No one saw them come. No one saw them leave. And yet, they were always there. The townsfolk stopped asking questions. They learned it was safer to look the other way. When a child was born silent, the mother simply opened the door and waited. When the sisters entered, they brought no comfort, only resolution. Babies who should have died breathed. Mothers who should have bled out survived. But life returned, changed. Jonas Hale was the first to speak against them. A merchant's son, driven by scripture and the tremble in his father's hands. He accused the sisters of witchcraft, of binding souls to unfinished things. He swore he saw Eunice Carroway weaving reeds into the shape of a man and burying them beneath a birthing bed. When Hale's wife delivered their first child, a girl born with thin white hair and a jaw that did not close, he forbade the sisters' entrance. He nailed crosses above every door. He read psalms until his throat cracked. His daughter died before sunset. And when he buried her beneath a rowan tree, he found the earth already turned, as if someone, or something, had been there first. 2 nights later, Hale vanished. His boots were found upright at his front step. Inside them, tucked neatly, a folded piece of lamb's wool. No one claimed to see him leave. His name was scratched off the parish rolls. His house was abandoned, but it did not stand empty for long. By the following moon, a new family occupied it. A mother, a child, and a cradle that never rocked. The Carroway Curse had no beginning the town could remember. But they would soon learn, it would have no end. The sisters did not wait for invitations. They had always known what belonged to them. There is something you must understand. The Carroway Curse did not announce itself with fire or fury. It bled quietly into the soil, like ink soaking into cloth. By the spring of 1842, the land beneath Dogwood Parish had begun to shift in ways the townsfolk refused to name. Grass thinned to brittle veins. Trees leaned toward the Carroway house, as though drawn by a sound no one else could hear. And the children, oh, the children, began to hum melodies their parents had never taught them. A girl named Abigail Carr was the first to bring back the symbol. She etched it into the frost on her bedroom window, a ring within a ring within a ring, all pierced downward by a single crooked line. Her mother scraped it away. By morning, it had returned. Not drawn this time, but pressed into the pane from the outside, as though a cold fingertip had traced it in the night. Abigail began to count backward in her sleep. She spoke to the corners of her room. And when asked what she was saying, she only whispered, "I'm remembering how I forgot." The preacher, desperate to reclaim the town's grip on faith, led a sermon beneath the shadow of the old chapel. He spoke fire and brimstone. He demanded the people turn away from the sisters, to stop calling them, to let God's will, not theirs, decide who would live and who would die. That same evening, the chapel bell split in half. No storm. No hand. Just a clean fracture, as though something old and weightless had sliced it from within. By the following week, 3 more infants were born, each bearing the same thin braid stitched at the base of their necks. Their mothers insisted the sisters had not been present. But the marks, those impossible braids, told another story. The gravedigger, now the only man still brave enough to track the patterns, began to map the births. He saw the rings tightening. Closing in. You see, the Carroway Curse was not a punishment. It was a reclamation. Something was being collected. Something was being woven together. The gravedigger's final note, his last entry before his disappearance, was just one sentence. They are building something. But what they were building, no one had the courage to find out. The ones who stayed in Dogwood Parish learned to live inside their fear. That's what true control is, not chains, not prisons, but a cage so carefully built that you no longer see the walls. The Carroway sisters didn't need to threaten. They didn't need to chase. The townsfolk kept themselves in place, trapped by their own silence, their own bargains. And yet, there are always those who resist. Edwin Morrow was not a brave man, but he was a stubborn one. His wife, Margaret, had fallen ill after the birth of their son, her skin gone pale as river stone, her voice a dry reed scraping against her throat. The sisters had appeared at their door, silent, barefoot, their hands wrapped in cloth soaked with an oil that glistened like ink. Edwin slammed the door. Bolted it. He refused them entry. He would not let witches touch his family. For 3 nights, Margaret's fever raged. And then, without warning, she began to recover. The color returned to her cheeks. Her voice softened. The boy, quiet since his first breath, began to giggle in his cradle. Edwin believed he had one. Until he awoke one morning to find his wife sitting at the edge of their bed, still and smiling, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When he asked what she was doing, she answered in a voice that was no longer hers. I've made room. The boy continued to laugh, but never at anything. Never with anyone. He simply stared upward, eyes wide, as though watching something only he could see. The townsfolk whispered that Edwin had broken the unwritten rule. Refusing the sisters' passage did not stop their work, it simply meant they would come another way. That winter, the gravedigger's map was found nailed to the chapel door. Circles upon circles, names scrawled in red ink, a web tightening around the Carroway house. At the center, a single word etched deeper than the rest. Measure. The preacher tore the map down, but by then it was too late. Everyone had seen it. Everyone understood. The curse was not a sickness. It was a design. And whatever the Carroway sisters were building, it was almost finished. By the time spring bled into summer, the air in Dogwood Parish had thickened. It clung to skin like oil. Crops withered, not from drought, but from something deeper, a quiet refusal of life. The Carroway sisters were seen more often now, moving like shadows through the fields, placing their bone-handled shears into the soil, leaving bundles of black thread tied to the gateposts. People stopped asking what the threads meant. They had learned to leave the signs untouched. But the children, they always see what adults choose to ignore. A boy named Caleb Dane followed the sisters one evening. He trailed them through the fog, his bare feet silent on the moss. He watched them gather beneath the crooked ash tree on the ridge. He watched them hum, not words, not music, but a sound that settled into his ribs like cold iron. He returned home before dawn. His parents found him sitting at the hearth, shivering though his skin burned. He wouldn't speak. He wouldn't eat. But with trembling hands, he carved something into the wooden floor, a crude eye, circled 3 times, pierced by a jagged downward line. When his father demanded to know what it meant, Caleb only whispered, "It's not finished yet. They need the last stitch." His father destroyed the carving, burned the planks in the fire. The next morning, Caleb was gone. His boots were found at the edge of the Carroway garden. One upright, one on its side, as though he had stepped out of them in mid-stride. The preacher called for resistance. For prayers. For fire. But no one answered. The town had folded in on itself. Doors stayed bolted. Windows were shuttered, not against weather, but against knowing. Even the animals began to turn away. Crows circled the ridge, but never landed. Dogs whimpered in their sleep, clawing at the walls to escape the sound no one else could hear. The gravedigger's house was abandoned now, but in his attic they found one final map, unfinished, a single name scrawled at its center. Yours. The Carroway Curse was not a story passed down. It was a story passed forward. And some stories, wait for the right ears, not every curse is meant to destroy you. Some are meant to pull you closer. To draw you in, breath by breath, until you become part of the machinery, until your heartbeat fits perfectly within the pattern. By midsummer, the Carroway house was no longer silent. At night, faint tapping echoed from its walls, a rhythm too steady to be wind, too deliberate to be decay. Those who passed near it claimed they heard footsteps, but not the heavy thud of boots. Bare feet. Soft. Measured. As if something within was walking in circles, waiting to be counted. And it was the counting that terrified them. Children began to count backward in their sleep. Over and over. Always the same numbers. 41. 40. 39. Their parents could not stop them. Shaking them awake only paused the chant. By morning, they would begin again. Some children vanished. Some were found, but not as they were. A little girl named Ruthie Bell was discovered sitting cross-legged in her family's root cellar, her dress soaked through, her hair twisted into a single tight braid that had not been there the night before. She rocked back and forth, humming, not a song, but a threading, a pulling. When her father lifted her into his arms, he found a single stitch at the base of her neck, woven not with thread, but with a strand of her own hair. When asked who had done this to her, Ruthie did not cry. She smiled. And she whispered, "I did." The townsfolk stopped calling the sisters by name. It was no longer necessary. The sisters did not require invitation. They had threaded themselves into the pulse of the parish, into the breath of its people, into the cradle of its children. The preacher fled without a sermon. The doctor boarded his windows and set fire to his own clinic. The fields shrank, folding inward like paper. The roads softened, their edges blurring until no one remembered which path led out. And in the center of it all, the Carroway house leaned further, as though eavesdropping on the earth, waiting for the final number to be counted. Because when the counting stops, the stitching begins. And the Carroways always finish what they start. There was a man who did not believe. Every story has one, a skeptic, a man of hard reason, who trusts only what he can hold in his calloused hands. His name was Elias Crow, a mason who had built the stone wells that fed the town, who had carved the chapel's foundation with his own hammer. Elias heard the whispers. He saw the shuttered windows, the abandoned cradles, the children who would no longer look their mothers in the eye. And he dismissed them all. He called it fever-born superstition, a sickness of the mind that had rotted the town's backbone. He declared he would prove the Carroway Curse a fiction. So, he went to the ridge alone. He brought salt in his pockets and a hammer in his hand. He found the sisters' garden overgrown, humming faintly with flies and blossoms the color of bruised skin. He found the door half open, the air inside thick with something that tasted like burnt sugar and iron. But he found no sisters. Only the sound of quiet footsteps in the room above him. Not hurried. Not frightened. Just pacing. Measuring. Stitching. Elias climbed the stairs, his hammer tight in his fist. What he found in that room was never written. No journal survived, no account recorded. But Elias did return. And something followed him home. His wife found him the next morning sitting in his workshop, his hands folded neatly over his chest, his shirt meticulously stitched shut with black thread. Each stitch was made from his own beard, twisted and knotted with surgical precision. When she tried to cut the threads, she found they would not tear. Not with blade. Not with fire. Elias did not move. He did not speak. Only his lips trembled, as if whispering something only he could hear. The local doctor called it catatonia. But the townsfolk understood. The stitching had begun. That night, the town's last bell cracked in half. The air thickened. The ground pulled inward. The Carroway house leaned further into its own shadow. Elias Crow had not disproved the curse. He had simply stitched himself into it. You see, some men spend their lives chasing truth. But the Carroways, they wait for men who come to find them. By the first frost, Dogwood Parish no longer belonged to its people. It belonged to something else, something woven, something deliberate. The townsfolk stopped measuring days by the sun. They measured by the sounds. The tapping in the walls. The humming in the fields. The soft footsteps that circled their homes at night. No one opened their doors anymore. No one dared to. A midwife named Esther Hale made the mistake of trying. She had delivered every child in Dogwood Parish for 15 years, long before the Carroway Curse had swallowed the town. She believed in clean linens, in steady hands, in the precision of birth. But belief, Esther would soon learn, does not protect you from what refuses to be named. One night, she heard a knocking. Not from the front door, but from beneath her floorboards, soft, rhythmic, as if a small fist was pressing upward, asking to be let in. She ignored it. She prayed over it. But the knocking continued, measured and patient, until it followed her through the house. Finally, desperate, she opened her cellar door. There was no one inside. Only a cradle. Rocking. Empty. Esther fled that night, but something followed. She claimed to see a figure trailing her through the fog, barefoot, its long black braid dragging in the dirt behind it. When she screamed, the figure stopped, tilted its head, and hummed. Esther vanished outside the parish border. Her bonnet was found hanging from a tree, tied in a knot that spelled a single word, measure. The word had returned. The counting had not stopped. By now, the people of Dogwood Parish understood. The curse was not a punishment. It was not wrath. It was a ledger. A tally. And the Carroway sisters were its keepers. The old preacher's journal was recovered from beneath the chapel floor, its final page a frantic scrawl, "They are not midwives. They are not witches. They are something older. They come to balance the thread. They come to finish the weaving." He had written one last line, circled 3 times. They come for the first breath. And when they do, when the counting ends, the cradle is never empty. The Carroway Curse waits for those who will carry it forward. Are you still listening? Good. We've only just begun. The deeper you go, the more you realize, some curses do not chase you. They wait for you to arrive. Like a seat held open at a table you didn't know you'd been invited to. And by autumn, the Carroway house no longer needed to move. The people came to it. Some were driven by desperation. Others by the low, gnawing pull that settled into their bones. One man, Thomas Vexley, arrived with a broken wife and a silent child. He had heard the stories, dismissed them as old superstition, but when his son refused to breathe for 3 days, neither dying nor living, he packed what little he owned and went to the ridge. Witnesses claimed Thomas walked directly to the Carroway gate, his child pressed tight against his chest. He was seen speaking to someone unseen, gesturing, bargaining. But no one ever saw the sisters appear. The house did not open. The garden did not stir. He simply laid his son upon the crooked porch step, turned, and left. The next morning, his son was returned. Alive. Breathing. But changed. The boy no longer blinked. He no longer slept. He no longer answered to the name his mother had given him. When asked who he was, the boy simply said, "I am the last stitch." And Thomas? He was found days later sitting in his workshop, his hands worn raw, his tools scattered around him, as though he had been trying to build something circular, something impossible to finish. He had carved the same word into his workbench over and over. Measure. 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 The gravedigger's abandoned home, long left to rot, was discovered to have one final message scrawled across its attic beams, a message carved so deeply the wood splintered around it. They are not counting the dead. They are counting the living. And that is the key most men never find. You were taught to fear the grave. To fear what comes after. But the Carroways knew the truth. The cradle is the beginning. The breath is the debt. And someone must always pay it. Some debts are inherited. Some, you volunteer for. And now I must ask you, comment below, twice, to mark your descent. The days that followed were not measured by sunrises, but by what was missing. Church bells fell silent. Roads unmarked by cart tracks. Whole homes left as though the inhabitants had simply risen from their chairs, mid-supper, and walked away. But their boots remained, always their boots, lined up, polished, placed deliberately at doorsteps, windows, and riverbanks. The same quiet signature, the same unseen hand. People whispered that the sisters no longer arrived by foot. They simply appeared, at doorways, by cradles, at the edge of fields, their hands always wrapped, their faces always half-turned as if they listened to something behind them. And now, something else had begun. The infants that were born, those still tethered to life, were not merely marked by the stitch. They began to hum. Not melodies. Not lullabies. But the same dull, layered hum the Carroway house had pulsed with for years. It moved through the children as though the house itself had passed its breath into them. A boy named Samuel Wicks was the first to hum while awake. His mother wept with relief when he cried for the first time, believing him free of the curse. But the sound he made was not a child's cry, it was the same threadbare sound the townsfolk had come to dread. The sound of something being pulled taut. The physician who came to examine Samuel vanished before sunset. His cart was found abandoned at the crossroads, the horses still tethered, their manes bound with black twine. Samuel's hum continued, uninterrupted, until the day his house fell silent. His family was never seen again. The gravedigger's final ledger resurfaced. Its pages, now stained and curling, told the story plainly. Names. Circles. Measures. At the center, a symbol none could decipher. 3 concentric rings pierced downward by a jagged line, the same symbol the children had etched into frost, into walls, into the soft bark of trees. But a final entry, scrawled hurriedly, as though the writer's hand trembled, offered a terrible key: the thread is not to bind the dead. The thread is to cradle the living. The stitch is not to close the body. The stitch is to open the door. It was never about keeping something out. It was always about letting something in. Dogwood Parish was no longer a town. It had become something else. Something breathing. Something waiting. The old roads crumbled beneath moss and root. The wells turned bitter, their stones slick with growths no one could name. The houses that remained, those that dared to stand, seemed to lean toward the ridge as if the land itself was surrendering. But the most terrifying thing wasn't the decay. It was the birth. The children born after the counting began no longer resembled their parents. Their eyes were too still. Their skin too pale. And their silence, oh, their silence, was no longer innocent. They were waiting. A man named Garrett Black tried to flee. He had packed his family into a wagon under cover of fog. He took the old North Road, the one they said was still passable. For hours he drove, never stopping, never looking back. But when the fog broke, Garrett found himself not on the border, not in the next township, but standing at the foot of the Carroway house. The same house. The same leaning shadow. He wept, begged, cursed the sky. His wife, pale and unmoving, said nothing. His son, seated calmly beside her, reached for Garrett's hand and whispered, "The stitch is closed." Garrett was found days later sitting in the hollow of an old elm, his hands bound together with lengths of his own hair. His boots were placed neatly at the base of the tree. His wagon, his family, gone. The word returned in whispers, measure. It echoed beneath floorboards. It slipped beneath doors in knots of thread. It was scratched into the frost on windowpanes by hands too small to reach them. The Carroway sisters no longer needed to appear. The town had learned the pattern. They had become part of it. The cradle was not just for infants. The cradle was the world. The thread was the path. The stitch was the key. And those who still remained understood that the counting had not been for the sisters. It had been for them. To know who was ready. To know who would carry the next measure. To know who had already begun humming in their sleep. There was a house on the edge of Dogwood Parish, a house that no one remembered building. It appeared one morning after the last snowfall, leaning just so, its porch sagging under the weight of time it had not yet earned. The windows were dusted with ash, and yet the hearth inside glowed faintly, as if it had always been burning. The townsfolk, what few remained, knew better than to approach. But a boy did. His name was Abram Dahl. His mother had disappeared weeks before, her boots left neatly by the door, a single braid of white hair wrapped around the latch. His father no longer spoke, no longer ate, sitting for hours with his hands folded across his chest, lips moving soundlessly. Abram followed the hum. It threaded through the morning air, soft and low, pulling him like a taut string. He crossed the fields, through the empty marketplace, past the chapel whose bell had long since fallen. When he reached the house, the door creaked open without touch. Inside, there were no Carroway sisters waiting. No dark figures. No braided hair. Only a cradle. Old. Worn. Rocking. Inside, a bundle wrapped in linen, tied with a single black thread. Abram did not cry. He did not call for his mother. He picked up the bundle. The hum ceased. He stepped from the house, cradling it in his arms, and the door swung shut behind him. The house, when others finally dared to approach, was empty. The cradle gone. The hearth cold. But etched into the wooden floor, where the cradle had been, was the same jagged sigil, 3 circles pierced downward by a fractured line. And beside it, a word carved in the delicate hand of a child. Measure. Abram returned to town, but he was not the same boy. His eyes did not blink. His breath was slow and deliberate. When he spoke, it was not in the voice of a child. The first breath must not be wasted. He spoke it over and over as he moved through the town, one step, then another, each measured, each deliberate. The Carroway Curse had never needed the sisters. It had only needed the next stitch. The pattern was always larger than the town. That was the final, quiet horror that Dogwood Parish had failed to see. The Carroway Curse was not bound to the ridge, to the house, or to the sisters. It was bound to the breath. The first breath. The one that is always owed. When Abram Dahl returned, carrying the bundle, the remaining families did not resist him. They did not ask. They did not run. They understood, he was not there to haunt them. He was there to complete the weaving. And the hum returned. Not from the house. Not from the ridge. But from within the children. They began to hum in perfect rhythm with Abram as he walked the edges of the fields, his footsteps pressing strange cymbals into the soft earth. Parents listened from behind bolted doors, unable to move, unable to speak, as the sound passed through their walls like thread pulled through cloth. When they finally dared to look, they found that Abram had marked their doorposts with black twine, tied in loops of 3, sealed with knots made from hair. Not his hair. Theirs. The curse was no longer an old story. It was not something that happened to them. It was something they now carried. And it spread. When the fog lifted, travelers reported finding identical marks in distant towns, 3 loops, a jagged line, a faint hum heard beneath floorboards. Children in neighboring villages began counting backward in their sleep. Infants were born with their hands clenched, as though already holding thread. The Carroway name traveled. Across borders. Across waters. Across time. The sisters' faces were never seen again. They were no longer needed. They had done their work. The thread no longer passed from their hands. It passed through the breath. It passed through the cradle. It passed through the ones who listened. And the ledgers, the silent, waiting ledgers, continued to grow, names stitched into them like seeds in dark soil. The curse is not a ghost story. It is not a warning. It is an inheritance. And the question that remains, the one that circles you now, is this: how close is the stitch to your door? There are debts that announce themselves loudly, swords, battles, blood spilled on stone. And then there are the debts that arrive quietly, debts that are breathed in, debts that walk barefoot through your lineage, debts that wait patiently, knowing that you will eventually come to them. The Carroway Curse was never about a family. It was about a system. A system that understood how to hide itself behind the smallest things. Behind breath. Behind birth. Behind silence. The families who fled Dogwood Parish carried the thread with them, though they did not know it. They settled elsewhere, across counties, across coasts, rebuilding lives that pretended to forget. But the counting resumed. In a mining town 3 days' ride west, a woman gave birth to a son who would not close his fists. His hands remained open, as though always waiting to grasp something unseen. In a coastal village, a fisherman's daughter found her mirror etched with symbols she could not remember carving. And in the city, far from fields and ridge, a boy named Elias Wren hummed as he walked, never pausing, never faltering, his steps too even, too measured for a child. When his mother asked where he learned the song, he smiled and said, "It's not a song. It's the pattern." That was how the curse endured. Not in the old house. Not in the soil. But in the rhythm passed from breath to breath, seed to seed, mother to child. The Carroways were never witches. They were never midwives. They were stewards. Keepers of the measure. Guardians of a thread that would outlast stone and river and fire. Even now, you can feel it. The rhythm in your own pulse. The counting that waits for you when you sleep. The forgotten names stitched into the back of your mind, the ones you think are dreams. But they are not dreams. They are the registry. And you must ask yourself, how many steps have you taken toward your own cradle? Because the first breath was never yours. It was loaned to you. And every debt must be measured. Every stitch must be pulled. Every cradle must be rocked. Especially yours. There's something else they never told you. The Carroway Curse wasn't just a lineage, a bloodline, a town swallowed by silence. It was a gate. A system of selection so ancient, so exact, that it hid beneath the very rituals you were taught to trust. The cradle. The breath. The naming. They are not accidents. They are locks. And some men, very few, are born holding the key. In the eastern city of Marlowe's Reach, decades after Dogwood Parish had faded from maps, a young scholar named Rowan Pike found a ledger in the forgotten stacks of the city archives. It was unmarked, unlabeled, its spine cracked and its pages stitched by hand with black thread. Inside were names. Not just from Dogwood Parish. But from everywhere. Names of the newborn. Names of the stillborn. Names of the vanished. And next to each, symbols, measures, the same jagged sigil carved into the ridge all those years ago. 3 circles. A fractured line. Rowan, curious but skeptical, traced the origin of the ledger. He followed shipping records, handwritten notes, purchase logs from distant parishes. Each trail led back to a single location, a shipment of charred records salvaged from a fire that consumed the Carroway house. The fire no one remembered lighting. The fire no one saw. Rowan thought he had uncovered a curiosity. A pattern. A mystery to solve. He did not understand that he had been summoned to it. Because the ledgers do not find men by chance. They find those who are ready to be measured. Soon, Rowan began to hum. At first unconsciously. Then constantly. His colleagues heard him whisper the same phrase over and over, sometimes while awake, sometimes in his sleep. The thread is pulling. The measure is near. His hands trembled as he wrote, as if someone else guided the ink. He carved the sigil into his desk, into the stone walls of the archives, into the bones of his own palms. One morning, Rowan vanished. His coat remained, carefully folded. His boots, of course, placed neatly by the door. The ledger he discovered. It continued to update itself. New names. New measures. New threads. Even now, it is being written. Even now, perhaps, your name is in it. You were never meant to read this story. You were never meant to hear these words. The Carroway Curse was designed to protect itself, not through force, but through silence. Through forgetting. Through disappearance. Those who got too close did not die in flame or battle. They vanished from memory, erased as though they had never existed. But some stains refuse to be scrubbed away. And the deeper you look, the more you realize, the curse is not just a story tied to a house, or to sisters on a ridge. It is a system so vast that it rewrites the bones of the world. It feeds through names. It feeds through doors left ajar. It feeds through boots placed neatly by thresholds. In the southern port of West Barrow, a ship called the Maze Lantern docked briefly before being abandoned by its entire crew. The only thing left behind was the captain's log, open to a final entry. The boy hums now. He does not stop. He is not my son. The boy's boots were found on the deck, perfectly aligned. In a mountain town where winters stretched like iron bands, a man named Samuel Reed kept hearing the sound of rocking wood beneath his floorboards, though no cradle remained in his home. His infant daughter began to tap her foot in perfect rhythm with the sound. When he tried to stop her, she bit his wrist and whispered, "The measure has moved." The curse had migrated. It did not stay tethered to the soil of Dogwood Parish. It traveled through the breath, through the hum, through the stitching of those who dared to listen. Even those who burned the old houses found that the ashes reassembled. Even those who buried the ledgers found them rewritten in the knots of their children's hair. And those who fled furthest, those who forgot the names, still found boots waiting by their doors. There is no distance. There is no escape. The system waits. It is not hunting you. It is choosing you. And perhaps, even now, as you listen to these words, you already feel it, a slight rhythm pulsing at the base of your skull, soft, persistent, familiar. The counting has already begun. That it was never the fire that consumed Dogwood Parish. It was the forgetting. They built new towns. Raised new churches. Sealed their windows with salt. They tried to write the Carroway name out of history. But history, like a stitch, always holds tension. And if you pull one thread, something else tightens. The curse adapted. It buried itself in new rituals. It hid in the ways children were soothed to sleep. It hid in the designs etched into cradle wood. It hid in the way parents measured a newborn's breath. Because the first breath is a debt. And someone always collects. Decades later, in the iron mills of Grayson Hollow, foremen began to report a strange occurrence. The apprentices, boys no older than 10, would fall silent during the morning bell and begin to hum in unison. The sound was low, layered, vibrating the stone walls of the mill itself. Supervisors dismissed it as childish nonsense, until one by one, the apprentices began to vanish. Their boots left neatly by the furnace doors. A single word was found carved into the handles of their work hammers: measure. The surviving workers who abandoned the mill swore they saw the same sigil, the 3 circles, the fractured line, etched into the glowing iron as it cooled, as if the metal remembered something their hands did not. And far from Grayson Hollow, a traveling midwife named Lila Kess found herself summoned to a difficult birth in a distant port city. But when she arrived, no mother awaited her. No father. Only an empty room, a rocking cradle, and a bundle wrapped in linen, tied with black thread. Pinned to the bundle, a strand of her own hair. Her own handwriting. A note she did not remember writing, the next stitch is ready. Lila was never seen again. The system had not just traveled. It had learned to self-weave. No longer dependent on the sisters. No longer tied to the house. The pattern was in the breath now. In the lullabies passed unknowingly from father to son. In the way boots are arranged by habit, by instinct. In the pauses between your own footsteps. You were never outside it. You were always walking toward it. And perhaps you have already arrived that there's a reason the Carroway Curse was never fully destroyed. You see, it was never just an event. It was a language. A system older than maps, older than memory. A language written not in ink but in arrangement. In placement. In rhythm. The cradle. The breath. The boots. The hum. These are the syllables of the curse. This is how it speaks to the world. And now, it speaks through you. In a government archive sealed beneath Whitlock Parish, a researcher named Elias Monroe uncovered a series of shipping manifests from towns that no longer existed. All shipments bore the same mark, a knot of black thread stitched through parchment, sealed with wax impressed by a symbol, 3 circles, pierced by a fractured line. He traced the crates. They had been delivered to cities far from Dogwood Parish. Inside, cradles. Old. Hand-carved. Hum-stained. The kind passed down as heirlooms. Elias, driven by obsession, found one of these cradles still in use. It sat in the nursery of a coastal estate, gently rocking though no wind stirred the air. The child it had held. Gone. Only the boots remained. Elias burned the cradle. He scattered the ashes. He fled the coast. But when he returned to his rooms, his boots were not where he'd left them. They were placed neatly by his bedside. Facing outward. As though awaiting another step. On the wall above them, the sigil, freshly carved. The system is not a chain to be broken. It is a loom that continues to weave, even when you try to tear the fabric. Each name forgotten is simply rewoven. Each house abandoned is simply rebuilt in silence. Each child lost is simply replaced. Elias's journals ended abruptly. But his final entry remains, the thread is not held by hands. It is held by the breath. It hums through the walls now. I am no longer listening to it. It is listening to me. Even now, it may be listening to you. Even now, the rhythm may be moving through your steps. Even now, the counting may already have begun. If you understand what's unfolding, if you feel the weight of this knowing, comment below this video, the measure has found me. Comment it twice. Once to seal the knowing. Once to lock the door behind you. Because there is no return. Only the next step. And the stitch always waits. You have to understand, the Carroway Curse was never a fixed story. It isn't bound by the bones of Dogwood Parish. It isn't tied to soil, or time, or blood alone. It moves because it was designed to move. It is a system of succession. When you hear the hum, when you dream the stitch, when you place your boots neatly without knowing why, you're not just touching the past. You're participating in it. You're perpetuating it. And some part of you has always known. There's a story they tell in the salt villages along the northern coast. Not written, not recorded, just passed quietly between old men who no longer fear being believed. They speak of children born humming. Not crying. Not gasping for breath. Humming. And when these children first smile, they do so with lips pressed tight, because the smile isn't for their parents. It's for something else. Something they already remember. One man, a retired watchman, claimed his grandson began arranging his shoes in perfect alignment by the age of 2. When asked why, the boy said, so I remember how to leave. By 3, the boy spoke the word measure in his sleep. By 4, he vanished. His boots remained by the hearth. The boy's mother heard the hum for weeks afterward, faint but constant, seeping from beneath the floorboards. The villagers buried the house in salt. But the system does not fear salt. The system does not fear fire. It weaves through memory, through habit, through the quiet choreography of your life. You arrange your boots without thought. You rock the cradle in rhythm. You hum to yourself when you walk alone. These are not accidents. These are permissions. Each step you take, each breath you draw, is a tacit agreement. You are not being hunted. You are being invited. The stitch is not outside you. It is waiting within you. And the curse is not a shadow on the ridge, it is a pattern you have always followed, unknowingly, step after step, breath after breath. When you arrange your shoes tonight, when you hear the faintest rhythm in the silence, will you choose to break the pattern? Or has the measure already found you? There is no rebellion against a system you unconsciously serve. That's the brilliance of the Carroway Curse. It never needed chains. It never needed walls. It only needed you to keep walking. It needed you to hum without noticing. It needed you to follow the rhythm of the stitch like it was your own heartbeat. And you did. You always have. There's a sealed report buried deep within the archives of the Caldwell Institute, a private record never published, never acknowledged. It describes a phenomenon called the breathline effect, a generational pattern of disappearances, infant anomalies, and inexplicable auditory hallucinations stretching across centuries, across continents. The report's final page contains only one handwritten phrase: every cradle is a gate. Every cradle. Not just the carved ones. Not just the old ones. Even the ones in your house. Even the ones that no longer hold anyone. Because the cradle is not about the wood. It's about the shape. It's about the sway. It's about the measure. A forgotten harbor town named Felwiconlia held a public burning of Carroway artifacts, boots, cradles, ledgers, linens, everything. But after the flames died, the ash refused to settle. It circled in the air, clung to their mouths, pressed against their eyelids. Within weeks, children began counting backward in their sleep. Villagers sealed their doors with iron, but their own hands betrayed them. They would untie the knots, unlock the bolts, arrange their shoes without memory of doing so. Because the system doesn't ask your permission. It simply waits for you to move. The rhythm is older than you. The pattern is beneath your memory. When a new family arrived in Felwick, seeking fresh land, new beginnings, they found boots already waiting on their porch. Perfectly aligned. Perfectly sized. As if the house had been waiting for them specifically. They stayed, of course. You always stay when the story feels like it's yours. The father heard the hum. The mother dreamt the stitch. The child never cried. Only the rocking cradle moved in the silence. And when asked why she never wept, the child finally whispered, "The first breath is not mine." How many steps have you already taken toward the cradle? How many times have you arranged your shoes, thinking it was your own choice? The measure has found you. You are already within it. The further you descend, the clearer it becomes. This was never a curse in the way you were told. Curses are loud. Curses leave burns, broken bones, blood on the ground. The Carroway system was never that crude. It didn't need to crush you. It only needed to invite you to participate. It needed you to follow the rhythm. It needed you to arrange your boots. It needed you to cradle what was never yours. In the far reaches of Ketter's Hollow, a town swallowed by fog and memory, a boy named Caleb Roan was born without a sound. He didn't cry. He didn't wail. He simply exhaled once, a soft hum, perfectly pitched. A measure. His mother insisted on burning the cradle, insisted on sealing the house with salt. But Caleb didn't need the cradle. He was the cradle. He rocked himself as he slept. He hummed his own rhythm. When the house burned, when the windows shattered, when the salt lines were erased by rain, Caleb was untouched. And in the ash, his boots remained. Arranged perfectly by the door. The measure is self-sustaining now. It doesn't need the old sisters. It doesn't need the ledgers. It doesn't even need the cradle. It needs you to continue the rhythm. Because the measure has learned to write itself inside you. When you tap your foot without knowing why. When you hum without realizing. When you line up your shoes neatly, just before you leave. It's not coincidence. It's succession. The boy Caleb vanished at age 6. His mother, they say, still rocks in her chair, humming softly, waiting for boots to appear at her threshold. The neighbors never speak to her. They don't need to. They know she still hears the measure. They know she's still part of the system. And you, by listening, by understanding, are part of it now. The breath was never just yours. The first breath was never truly yours. The boots wait at every door. The stitch waits in every cradle. And the hum waits in the quiet between your thoughts. Step by step. Measure by measure. You are walking toward it. You always were. Some men believe they can outpace it. They think if they flee far enough, burn the right symbols, seal the right doors, the measure won't follow. But you can't outrun what moves through the fabric of habit. You can't outrun what breathes inside your routines. The curse isn't chasing you. It's waiting for you. It's waiting for the moment you place your boots just so. It's waiting for the hum you whisper when you think you're alone. There was a man named Jonah Fairweather, a scholar who traveled to the remains of Dogwood Parish decades after the last house crumbled. He believed he was immune to the story, a rationalist, armed with logic, dismissive of folklore. He found the remains of the Carroway house buried beneath ivy and moss. The door still leaned open. Boots still sat in perfect alignment on the porch, weathered, crumbling, but untouched. He didn't dare enter. But he documented every detail. He measured the doorframe. He sketched the boot prints. He even noted the faint sound, a hum, nearly silent, emanating from the earth beneath his feet. When Jonah returned to the city, he began to change. His notes, once meticulous, devolved into repetition. The same word, scrawled over and over, measure. His boots, once left in disarray, were always found placed neatly by his bed, perfectly aligned, despite his insistence that he never arranged them. His friends noticed he hummed constantly. The same four-note rhythm. When questioned, Jonah only smiled and said, "It's not mine. It's borrowed." Jonah Fairweather vanished the following spring. His coat remained. His journal remained. His boots, of course, perfectly aligned, facing outward. Those who read his final entries felt something. A pull. A rhythm. An urge to arrange things, to hum quietly, to step into the pattern. And now you've heard the story. Now you've walked this path with me. Now you've arranged your own shoes without thinking. Now you've felt the hum, faint but present, like breath beneath your breath. The system doesn't need to convince you. It only needs you to keep walking. One step closer. One breath deeper. The stitch is already tightening. The truth is, the Carroway curse never needed to be spoken aloud. It is not a story passed by words. It is passed by the way your body remembers things your mind has forgotten. The way your hands smooth the sheets. The way your boots align themselves. The way your breath catches when the hum finds you. Some called it superstition. Some called it mass delusion. Some dared to burn the cradles, to silence the names. But you cannot burn a rhythm. You cannot silence a breath. You cannot unlearn the pattern that has already been stitched into the fabric of your steps. In the outskirts of Valemore, a man named Abram Wells built his home with no cradles, no soft linens, no boots by the door. He walked barefoot for years, denying the system, refusing the measure. But denial is not immunity. His wife gave birth to twins, one who would not cry, and one who would not stop smiling. He sealed the windows, burned the linens, and fled with his family to the cliffs beyond the town. They say Abram tied his boots with iron nails and threw them into the sea. But the next morning, the boots were placed perfectly at his threshold. Not the boots he cast away, new ones, stitched in black thread, polished, waiting. His children hummed in their sleep. His wife began to align their furniture without knowing why. Abram carved the sigil into his own chest to sever the rhythm, but the cut only deepened his place in the pattern. The system does not punish. It simply continues. When Abram disappeared, his boots remained. His house, abandoned, began to rock on its foundation. It hummed. The villagers dared not go near it. Even now, they say the house still rocks on its own, as though Abram is still pacing inside, wearing boots that no longer exist. You are not separate from this. You felt the hum. You've walked the steps. You've arranged the boots. The measure is not coming for you. It has already arrived. And perhaps you already know, the next cradle is yours. There is no closing to this story. There is no safe distance. There is no final page. Because the Carroway Curse is not a tale you hear. It's a rhythm you inherit. It's a breath you take without questioning. It's a step you place without realizing. It's a system that survives because men like you continue to move within it. And now you can feel it, can't you? That subtle vibration beneath your ribs. That familiar hum when the room falls silent. That habit, aligning your shoes perfectly, as though something waits for you to do so. This was never just a story about sisters on a ridge. This was never just about Dogwood Parish. This is a system stitched across generations, moving beneath language, embedded in the quiet choreography of your life. And no one escapes the measure. Not the men who fled. Not the mothers who sealed their homes with iron and salt. Not the children born with the breath of something older stitched beneath their skin. Not you. It moves through footsteps, through hums, through silent agreements made in the stillness of midnight. And now that you've walked this path with me, now that you've breathed in these truths, now that you've heard the stitch hum beneath your own silence, what will you do? Will you fight it? Will you run from it? Or will you finally see, you were never outside the story? You were born into the measure. You have always been a stitch in the system. The cradle rocks because you keep breathing. The boots wait because you keep walking. The hum persists because you have always listened. And perhaps, when you arrange your shoes tonight, when you catch yourself humming that rhythm you don't remember learning, you'll understand. It was never about the sisters. It was never about the house. It was always about you. You are the system now. You carry the stitch. The measure has found you. The measure has always found you.